Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from AntiWar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, October 5th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of AntiWar.com today. Biden is worried about Ukraine aid after McCarthy's ouster. So President Biden said Wednesday that he was worried about the prospect of Congress authorizing more Ukraine aid after Representative Kevin McCarthy was removed as Speaker of the House. Biden said, quote, "It does worry me, but I know there are a majority of members of the House and Senate in both parties who have said that they support funding Ukraine," end quote. And he is right that the majority of Congress still favors spending more on this war, but House Republicans who oppose arming Ukraine do have significant power and leverage, and that was demonstrated by the ouster of McCarthy. Matt Gaetz launched that effort over allegations that McCarthy cut a secret deal with Democrats to bring new Ukraine aid to the floor. So one of the Republicans who announced that he's running for Speaker is Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio. And he has said that he is opposed to additional funding for Ukraine. So Jordan has voted against aid for Ukraine basically the whole time, going all the way back to the $40 billion aid package that was passed in May 2022. So that $40 billion bill, that was the only Ukraine aid package that was voted on as a standalone bill. So you could get a good idea of where people stand on that. And because of this position, Jordan has earned a grade of F from Republicans for Ukraine. Now, Republicans for Ukraine is a neocon project that was launched to rally GOP support for the proxy war. It's being led by an organization that is headed by Bill Kristol, and they have a section of their website called Ukraine Report Cards, and it shows the member of Congress and how they voted on all the Ukraine legislation, and then they give them a grade. So if you go down to Jim Jordan, the only thing that he has voted on was the Ukraine Lend-Lease Act. If you remember, that happened right at the beginning of the war, which allowed the U.S. to lend or lease weapons to Ukraine like the U.S. did the Soviet Union, the British, and the French before formally entering World War II. You know, they haven't needed it because they've just been giving Ukraine all these weapons. But so Jordan voted for that, but he's voted against everything else. They consider him anti-Ukraine, so he has a grade of an F. So I think, you know, if someone like that was the Speaker of the House, that would be very significant. Now, the other candidate who has announced he plans to run for Speaker is Steve Scalise, and he has earned a grade of B from Republicans in Ukraine, and he's voted on everything for them. So I guess he's not too, doesn't have the rhetoric that the neocons would prefer. But so I think there's going to be others that might try to run for Speaker. But, again, and I'm not really sure right now who has the better chance. But again, I think it would be very significant if the Speaker is against this proxy war and make things really difficult for Biden. So Republicans are planning to hold a Speaker election on October 11th. According to Bloomberg, all legislative action is likely to halt until then, meaning that President Biden will not get the additional $24 billion that he is seeking to spend on this war, in the meantime. So the president said that he will soon deliver another speech on why the U.S. should continue to fuel the war. And he also hinted that he may have another way to get the money. Biden said, quote, "There is another means by which we may be able to find funding, but I'm not going to get into that right now," end quote. So I'm not sure what that could mean. And realistically, there probably is many ways that he could keep this proxy war going if he can't get the aid passed through Congress. And then there is always the chance that some kind of deal is made on the Ukraine aid, and things can happen very quickly in Congress. One day, you might wake up and the headline might be, the House passed the Ukraine aid bill, because there's all sorts of procedural stuff. But it does seem right now that there's not going to be a vote until at least next week on the House Speaker. So we'll see how this all plays out. And, the Republicans will still have the power to oust the Speaker, as far as I'm aware, unless they change it by introducing a resolution like Gates did. Just one of them has to do it. So they're going to have leverage over whoever the next Speaker is. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine is freaking out over the lack of new U.S. aid from Congress. So you're going to notice a theme, in tonight's stories. There's a lot of freaking out going on. So Ukrainian officials are freaking out over the uncertainty about new Ukraine aid being passed through Congress, and this was said by a Ukrainian member of parliament speaking to Politico. The MP said, quote, "We are freaking out. For us, it is a disaster. We are interested in getting things sorted out so American democracy can function, and so we can restore the bipartisan consensus on supporting their own national interests by supporting Ukraine," end quote. I would say what's happening in the House is democracy functioning. But the ouster of Kevin McCarthy, what I mentioned, might be a little repetitive, some of the things I mentioned in this article, but basically this is just saying that Ukrainian officials are kind of scrambling right now because their biggest backer all of a sudden can't get this aid passed like they could so easily before. So Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova, she recently said in a statement, she put out a statement about what happened in the House, kind of, in Ukrainian to the Ukrainians so they would understand the situation. And then she also said that there is at least $1.6 billion left for the U.S. to arm Ukraine using that presidential drawdown authority, which ships weapons directly from Pentagon stockpiles. She said $1.6 billion was left, but the other day the Pentagon told Congress that they have $5.4 billion. So that $5.4 billion is a lot. They can go a few months with that amount to keep sending weapons over there. But the other thing is this budgetary aid. She also mentioned that they have just over $1 billion in that left, and that's going to cover Ukrainian government expenses for October. But they're not sure what's going to happen in November, as I covered that a story yesterday that the Wall Street Journal reported on. They're worried that the money's going to dry up. And the fact is the U.S. has been funding the salaries of Ukrainian government workers. So I'm sure they are freaking out about that. All right, so the next one here, 11 anti-war activists arrested in Senator Bernie Sanders' office. So this article is from Code Pink, the activist group, and a group of 50 activists and Vermont constituents staged a sit-in inside Bernie Sanders' office on Wednesday, demanding the senator to call for peace and diplomacy in Ukraine instead of more weapons and war. The sit-in resulted in the arrest of 11 activists, including an 89-year-old Code Pink peace activist. And the group was joined by Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Cornel West in the Senate lobby for a prayer vigil before the sit-in. So they were pretty active, the Code Pink people, on Wednesday, talking to a lot of members of Congress, people outside. And Bernie Sanders has been really bad on Ukraine. He recently tweeted something about, we have to get this new Ukraine aid funding passed through. And, it's interesting. I saw on Twitter, Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted a picture with Code Pink activists saying she agreed with them and that we needed to end the war in Ukraine. It's just kind of the difference in politics in D.C., how much they've changed, over the past few years. So, yeah, we wanted to highlight this. Yeah, I mean, one of the people arrested was Jody Evans, who's a co-founder of Code Pink. I saw a video of her getting arrested on Twitter. She expressed her disappointment in Sanders, who has voted for more weapons to Ukraine and even criticized Democrats who called for peace talks. So, yeah, that's where we're at right now with the progressives in Congress, at least. All right, so the next one here, NATO is at the bottom of the barrel of weapons stockpiles. So more about the West running out of weapons. So the head of NATO's military committee is urging the alliance to increase arms production, warning that the bottom of the barrel of NATO's stockpiles is now visible due to the massive amounts of weapons and ammunition that have been shipped to Ukraine. So this is Dutch Admiral Rob Bauer. He made the comments on the first day of the Warsaw Security Forum. He said that NATO military budgets increased before the Russian invasion, but that the Western arms industry did not increase production capacity. He said, quote, and that has led to higher prices already before the war, and that has actually been exacerbated by the fact that we now give away weapon systems to Ukraine, which is great, and ammunition, but not from full warehouses. We started to give away from half full or lower warehouses in Europe, and therefore the bottom of the barrel is now visible. And we need the industry to ramp up production at a much higher tempo, and we need large volumes, end quote. So I just remembered, I should have included this in the article, but earlier in the war, he was talking about how the West, the U.S. and NATO might need to go on kind of a war economy footing, with their governments putting down orders for, factories that produce other things to start making weapons like, the U.S. did during World War II. And that was a while ago that he said that. And earlier this year, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that Ukraine was using artillery shells at a faster rate than the entire alliance can produce. And, this all raises questions about the sustainability of NATO funding and fueling this proxy war. So Bauer's comments came after a British military source told The Telegraph that the UK was out of weapons to give Ukraine. So, there's just been a lot of signs that this thing might not be able to continue for much longer, or at the rate that they've been arming Ukraine. And Ukrainian officials have been very candid about the fact that without this support, mainly from the US, but also from the European countries, without it, they wouldn't be able to fight this war. All right, so the next one here, U.S. transfers alleged Iranian ammunition shipment to Ukraine. So the Pentagon announced Wednesday that it had transferred a shipment of ammunition typically used in rifles to Ukraine that it claims was seized from Iran last year. U.S. Central Command said this was done on October 2nd, 2023. The U.S. government transferred approximately 1.1 million rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammunition, which is typically used in rifles like a AK-47. So they sent that over to the Ukrainian armed forces. The command said that the ammunition was seized on December 9th off a vessel bound for Yemen. The U.S. said that the shipment was from Iran and was intended to arm Yemen's Houthis. And for their part, Iran denies that they armed the Houthis, and the Houthis also deny that they received smuggled Iranian weapons. The U.S. Navy often seizes weapons shipments going into Yemen, and it's usually small arms like this, like ammunition for rifles, or it's AK-47s. I mean, things that are very common that could really come from anywhere. I'm sure Iran gives the Houthis some kind of support, but the fact is we don't really know. And it's also funny how the U.S. is always claiming that Iran is, sending all these weapons into Yemen when you have the U.S. on the other side throughout the brutal war in Yemen, which thankfully there's been a ceasefire that's held pretty good since April 2022. But I mean, the U.S. was, gave the Saudis an air force. They were maintaining their air force and completely enabling the destruction of that country and forcing a blockade. So the level of support that they even accuse Iran of giving the Houthis is nothing near what the U.S. has given the Saudis in this war. But anyway, the CENTCOM said that the ammunition became available through civil forfeiture claims made by the U.S. Justice Department against Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So according to CNN, the DOJ is also seeking the forfeiture of more than 9,000 rifles, 284 machine guns, about 194 rocket launchers, more than 70 anti-tank guided missiles, and more than 700,000 rounds of ammunition that the U.S. Navy allegedly seized from Iran. Again, nothing crazy, not any kind of really advanced weapon systems. The U.S. is looking to unload the weapons into Ukraine. As I just mentioned, NATO stockpiles are dwindling. So this is the things that they're resorting to. And 1.1 million rounds of small arms ammunition isn't really that much. All right, so the next one here, massive drone attack on Russian border regions. The Russian Defense Ministry on Wednesday said that air defenses downed 31 Ukrainian drones over 3 Russian oblasts that border Ukraine, and those are the oblasts of Belgorod, Bryansk, and Kursk. So according to AP, and this does sound like the highest number I've heard in a single day, they're saying that this appears to be Ukraine's single largest cross-border drone attack on Russian territory since Russia launched its invasion last year. The governor of Belgorod also reported heavy shelling, saying that a total of 80 munitions were fired at the oblast. Russia has made clear that it believes Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian territory would not be possible without help from the US and NATO. The Economist recently reported that Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia use intelligence often from Western partners. Ukraine has stepped up its attacks on the Russian mainland and Crimea as its counteroffensive has stalled. Also on Wednesday, Russia said that it stopped a Ukrainian landing team from entering Crimea. So the Russian Defense Ministry said that it was in the northwest section of the Black Sea. Planes of Russia's aerospace forces prevented a Ukrainian assault force from infiltrating Crimea. All right, let's see what's next here. Germany denies Ukraine cruise missiles. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a German newspaper has reported that Berlin has no near-term plans to send Kiev Taurus cruise missiles, and the Ukrainians have really been asking for these. This was reported by the Bild newspaper. They said Germany was unwilling to send the missiles out of fear that they would use them to target the Kerch Bridge, which is the Crimean bridge that connects southern Russia with the Crimean Peninsula. That's been attacked twice. During this war, I believe the first time was a truck bombing, and then the second time was a drone boat that hit the bridge. And then Russia views this as very critical infrastructure. So these missiles, I believe, have a range of about 300 miles. So that would be a pretty significant increase in, NATO, in the range of missiles that NATO would be supplying Ukraine. There were some signs recently that the Germans were thinking about doing it, but it looks like they're not for now. But when it comes to Germany and when it comes to Olaf Scholz, he ruled out sending tanks. He ruled out allowing the transfer of warplanes, and he's done both of those things since. And when he initially said that he was against sending planes and tanks, he said he was trying to prevent World War III. But now here we are, and he's allowed those things to happen. And, escalations keep continuing as long as this war keeps getting fueled by NATO. The risk of a direct war between NATO and Russia is increasing. And, that's why hopefully this becomes untenable for the U.S. and NATO, and that they're forced to push Ukraine to make a peace deal with Russia so people stop getting killed. And so this risk of nuclear war, goes down a little bit. All right, so the next one here, Senate Foreign Relations Chair to block Egypt aid. So this is another one from Kyle. Senator Ben Cardin informed the State Department that he would like to withhold over $200 million in military aid earmarked for Egypt over concerns about Cairo's human rights abuses. The potential suspension comes after the former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez, was indicted on charges that included accepting bribes to aid the Egyptian government. So Cardin is Menendez's replacement, and he's saying that they want to hold, he's trying to correct for what Menendez was doing, it seems like, and he wants to hold up more aid to Egypt. Egypt receives over $1 billion in military aid from the U.S. each year. So $200 is not too much. Yeah, so they get $1.3 billion in annual military aid. That's a lot. And a portion of that aid, $300 million, is meant to be contingent on Cairo not committing significant human rights abuses. And the State Department report on human rights in Egypt has annually reported systematic atrocities committed by Cairo. So what's interesting is I covered this a few weeks ago. There was a story that said the U.S. is going to take some of the aid, I believe it was about $85 million, and that was meant for Egypt and give it to Taiwan, as they want to ramp up military aid for Taiwan. So it shows what the priority is for the U.S. All right, so the next one here, thousands displaced by clashes in U.S.-occupied Syria. This article is from The Cradle. And according to the UN, about 6,500 families have been displaced by recent clashes between the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, that's the Kurdish force in the region, and Arab tribesmen in Deir ez-Zor, who have been leading a rebellion against the Kurdish militia since August. So a UN official said, or a UN report said, quote, approximately 6,500 families have been displaced to government areas. Essential services were impacted due to the hostilities, end quote. So this fighting is still going on, and this is, again, a U.S.-backed force in U.S.-controlled Syria. This is in Deir ez-Zor, where much of the oil fields are located. And a pro-government newspaper claimed on October 3rd that the SDF is barring the displaced from returning to their homes. So I guess the allegation is that they don't want the Arabs that have left to come back. The Kurdish groups have been accused of facilitating demographic changes favoring northern Syria's Kurdish population. Heavy clashes between the SDF and formerly allied Arab tribes began on the 27th of August when the SDF arrested Ahmad el-Kabil, also known as Abu Kalwa, and he's an allied commander of the Deir ez-Zor Military Council. So this Deir ez-Zor Military Council was at one point backed by the U.S. as well, and this is not a new thing to see two U.S.-backed forces fighting against each other. All right, so the next one here, Kenyan police heading to Haiti have a history of brutality. This article is actually from the New York Times, out of all places, but it has just good information about the things that Kenyan police have been accused of now that they've been picked to lead this intervention in Haiti, which is a U.S. operation. It's funded by the U.S., and they convinced Kenya to go do it. And it just goes over some of those things. So Kenyan police officers have shot and beaten hundreds of protesters this year, human rights groups have said, raising concerns about what level of force will be used to combat organized criminal groups in Haiti and whether that will put civilians in harm's way. And there's just a lot of information here about this situation, and there's some reports saying that Kenya is saying that it's probably going to take 3 years, this operation, to to restore order in Haiti. And there has been a lot of violence on the streets in Haiti. According to the UN, nearly 3,000 people were killed in a 6-month period. But at the same time, you have the government of Ariel Henry, which is unelected. He came to power when Jovenel Moïse, the previous president, was shot and killed. And, people view the Henry government as illegitimate. There's been uprisings against him. It's not just this fighting on the street. I don't know too much about Haiti or what's really going on there, but this just seems like a really bad idea. It seems like it's going to be a disaster sending in this foreign force with all this violence going on and all, a government that people don't view as legitimate. It's just going to be a mess. It's just going to stir things up even more. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Jeffrey Sachs, Beyond the Neocon Debacle and Towards Peace in Ukraine. We have one from Ted Galen Carpenter, Congressional Media Hypocrisy on Cluster Bombs. One from Lori Calhoun, Stone Cold Dead Republic, When Everything is Cast as a War. One from Ivan Aland, A Lack of Introspection on Failed U.S. Foreign Policy. And our spotlight is from Daniel Larison, An Armed Mission in Haiti is a Mistake. And he makes a lot of really good points about why it's a bad idea. But that is everything. You could always help the show by sharing it on social media, telling your friends, commenting on YouTube or Rumble or Odyssey, wherever you watch. If you listen to the podcast, you could leave a review. I appreciate all that stuff. That's it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the last show of the week, Friday. But that's it. I'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening.